All right, welcome everybody to the Sapien podcast. I'm very excited to be here today with Dr. Bosch and Dr. Robinson, um, naturopathic physicians working in the world of lifestyle optimization, hormone optimization, all the fun stuff that my listeners like to learn about.
Indeed.
And thank you guys for joining me.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So, quick introduction, at Evolve, my clinic here, we do a lot of lifestyle medicine, right? And as an internist, I was discouraged to really do hormone replacement and really think about hormones as a medical treatment. And in the last few years, I have started doing a lot of hormone management. It kind of started with thyroid management that I didn't get a really robust education on, that I had to learn on my own.
Yes.
I got into male hormone replacement, which we're going to tackle today. And more recently, a lot of female hormone replacement, which kind of the tides are turning with female hormones and people are really changing how they look at it, both patients and providers alike, right? My
Right.
OB-GYN colleagues. So kind of with that, can you guys kind of talk a little bit about what you do, a little bit about the hormone zone and your podcast, the Sex Docs?
Sure. Well, we're both, as you said, naturopathic doctors. We practice in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we've been doing hormone replacement therapy and anti-aging wellness medicine for 18 years. And we met in school, and we've been together since 2003, essentially, and practicing now for a long time together. Um, yes, we do. As you had mentioned, we have so sort of evolving from our private practice. Inevitably, we wanted to, just like you, just spread the message to as many people that would listen. And I think more and more people are listening. So it's just a great time to get involved in wellness. So yes, we created a podcast. It's actually called Longevity Protocol. Now, you said the Sex Docs because you're right, because you can follow us on Instagram at the Sex Docs. So we have that euphemistic handle because it's just what we tend to do. As you know, once you start talking with people about hormones, inevitably sexual wellness gets brought up, and it sort of evolved that way for us.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So I have so many questions. I want to know more about the longevity protocol. I guess let's tackle the hormone stuff, because I think that's what people really are trying to understand. And there's two sides of it. And I kind of look at it as two things, the male side and the female side. If it's okay with you guys, let's start with male hormone issues, because it's alarming, right? Testosterone levels are plummeting.
Yes.
Fertility rates are dramatically low. IVF clinics are booming,
Yes.
right? So what's going on? Because I have some ideas, but I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I'll share some of that. So back in 2017, I was able to go to London and I did a talk on the global decline of testosterone in sperm in men. And that was in 2017. And really all I did with that was just kind of look at the research and just collate it all together in a presentation. And yes, that was, as I went through all of that, it was alarming. I mean, I knew it was bad, but when you kind of dig in, and interestingly, um, when I did that talk in July of 2017, that very month, and I didn't even know because the study hadn't come out, there was an additional study that came out of Beth Israel that also supported that. So everything I was looking at was prior to 2017, and this was like a big, robust study that further just corroborated everything that everybody's seeing, that there's this 3 generational decline of both testosterone and sperm, not just in the US, but it was a global issue. So I went through and just kind of and marked it through various countries, and there's really just this big issue, and it's a multifactorial reason, of course. And I not only got into some of the obvious things of the diet and exercise or lack thereof, a lot of the nutritional deficiencies and those kind of things, a shift away from, let's say, high protein and animal proteins into more sort of soy-based things and vegan, vegetarian approaches, that was probably a big part of it. But I even got into some of the other outlying things, like some of the mental, emotional things that are associated with some of the behavioral psychology and behavioral endocrinology. That was interesting getting into that, some of the behavioral endocrinology, because most of that is based in animal models, and they're looking at gibbons and various chimpanzees and all of that, and groups that way. But there really is a lot of understanding from how we think and feel and how that dictates how hormones go. And even to the point of, sort of attacking masculinity that's been sort of happening to some degree, not allowing men just to be men, not treating them like defective women or defective girls. And that's part of it, because I think that leads into why we're actually seeing a physiological decline, at least again, in part. It's multifactorial.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear what some of your theories are, because I think one of the things that was so well established by the research that John did, and even what we have been observing over almost 2 decades in our practice, is that there really is such a negative feedback cycle. Obviously, the social implications, how they are suppressing testosterone to a certain extent, I think we're theorizing, causing suppressed testosterone, and then how that is having a generational effect. And then when we do segue into women, how moms with lower testosterone will produce males with lower testosterone. So, I'm glad, as you mentioned, the tide is turning. I'm glad that patients and physicians are starting to advocate for something different, because otherwise, I mean, we're already 3 generations in. Who knows what would happen if we kept this going?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some strange stuff about it. Is this just natural evolution for humans? I've heard some people talking about that. Doesn't I don't buy that, right? I
Doesn't
come
it?
from I come from this idea of ancestral medicine. Like
Yes.
we don't need to anchor ourselves on the last 100 years of evidence-based medicine that seems to be the only thing people want to hear about.
Yep.
Like that's well and good, but there's thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s of years of history, and humans became the dominant species because we're pretty well adapted to this planet, right? So when it comes to nutrition, you mentioned things like, this vegan, vegetarian stuff and soy-based products. To me, it's pretty obvious. We're carnivorous creatures, we can survive on plants, but we really need animal food. We need animal cholesterols. We need the proteins and all of these micronutrients that are part of animal food. So I've always been a proponent of an animal-based diet, because I don't need to look at this blue zone research, which is super ambiguous, or like weird colon cancer research, which is super not definitive. You could just look at how our teeth evolved, how our guts evolved, like what we actually ate, what we see in the historical record. It's pretty obvious. We ate meat anytime we caught a chance to eat meat, probably even organ meat, and in a nose to tail approach, right?
Yep.
All these important critical factors. It can't just be the food, though, right? It can't just be the food that's causing this. Um, I also think that the men not acting like men, using their bodies, building their muscles, doing some fasting, doing some high aggressive physical things contributing to it. But then I start asking myself questions like, well, what about all the microplastics, right? Why is this a global pandemic of low T and sexual dysfunction? It's because we're doing something to the planet, right? And
Mhm.
I think that the phthalates, there's that interesting research where that area, the perineum, the area between the testicles and the
Yeah.
scrotum is shrinking.
Oh, yes. Yes.
You
Mhm.
know, that's pretty telling, thinking about all the chemicals. So do you guys have a feeling I always say the same thing, multifactorial, that's what it is. But do you have any sense of, is there some critical issue? Do you think the phthalate research, the microplastic research, is that, something you guys believe in as a root cause? Or is it truly multifactorial and just everything in our world is making men less virile?
Well, I would say,
Yes.
yeah, right.
Yes.
I would say that I think the critical issue is our incessant need to find the thing.
Mm, mm,
That's a
mm.
problem.
That's a
I mean,
problem.
just like you mentioned about the blue zone. So suddenly the blue zones are valid because of research, or is it because of the hundreds and hundreds of generational
Observation.
ancestral
Mhm.
habits that these people have been passing on? Those people in the blue zones aren't living a healthier, longer life because they read some research. So the same thing is true with what we're observing now with this decline in masculinity and testosterone. It is multifactorial. We must look at it that way. And to your point, a lot of it is somewhat common sense. So I think that there are some very specific answers, like about the plastics and the environmental toxins that I'm sure you're going to comment on, but I would say that as long as we continue to demand that we address this in almost a simple way of saying, just like we've had cumulative damage, we can have cumulative repair by changing the little things in our life that add up to making big impact.
You know, when we were in school, Dr. Walter Crinian, who's passed on, was an environmental medicine specialist, and in naturopathic medicine, looking at, you know, I learned about the environmental working group in 2002. You know, we were talking about that when we were early on in school. That, you know, the group that kind of shows, you know, the Dirty Dozen and all of that. I mean, that was early training for us. So we've been around that for a long time, and knowing that what phthalates and all of these things are doing is it's real. It has you know, coined as obesogens. So we know it's leading into obesity and inevitably just endocrine disruptor across the board. There's plenty of research with this. I don't really think it's
a
really,
debate
yeah, it's not
anymore.
really a debate
Yeah.
anymore. So what we also would learn in school, they would say, well, it's not a matter of if you're toxic, it's just a matter of how much you are, and then to what extent that toxicity is affecting your health. And then we should go through a process of detoxing when we can. So yeah, it's inevitably, so we're bringing this back to men and testosterone. Their endocrine tissues are really sensitive to these types of chemicals. And so the testicles, the gonads, ovaries are going to be very sensitive to these chemicals for sure. And interfering with how the hormones that are going to be produced, how they're going to then be affected at the receptor. So
Right.
all of that is pretty well established, and we should seek to minimize these things and decrease the use of microplastics or plastics across the board so we can get the microplastics more and more out of the environment. And then just make sure we're in a process of constantly detoxing, because we're never going to get away from it altogether.
Right. And, you know, at the risk of sounding cliche, and to remember how to enjoy living a little bit more in the midst of being surrounded by all these warnings of everything being toxic. You know, some of it is also just saying, okay, I've had a busy city day, and this is how my week tends to go. So I'm just going to make a point of going out on Saturday into the park and just sitting and being and chilling out for a minute, so that we are getting some of those very natural and easy, accessible, free for the most part, methods of elimination.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I see it. I see the lifestyle modifications as a profound intervention, because I have guys come in 300, 400 on repeat tests on I kind of focus on the total
Oh,
T,
sure. Mhm.
easier, whatever. Um, and you know, just some weightlifting, like real weightlifting, and some intermittent fasting with a focus on a high protein diet, that gets the job done for a lot of guys.
Yeah. Especially when they're younger, especially when they're younger.
And they feel so much manlier.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they do. They feel like, oh, this is something I have the power to control. I mean, think about one of the most important things in increasing that testosterone. Remember how you were saying about your team wins?
Yeah.
Is that idea of like, I'm empowered. You know, you always talk about women empowerment, but there's a lot to be said about men feeling empowered as well, and how that actually has a physiologic benefit.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important. So, like, you also mentioned, and I talk a lot about exercise and nutrition. So most of my listeners are people that buy into that part, like, honestly, right? And people that are listening that haven't bought in, they're listening because they're trying to buy in, right? They're trying to learn. So I've got 50 podcasts talking about nutrition and, you know, weightlifting. You mentioned something interesting, the kind of behavioral component of endocrinology.
Yes.
They're like specific, you know, we're started talking in generalities. What are some specific behavioral interventions that you think can really help men that struggle with this issue?
Well, to help them, well, I mean, I think just having an awareness in general to know that, again, guys, when you're wanting to act masculine, that there isn't anything toxic about that per se, even though, again, this becomes this term as of late. So just being empowered to say, hey, it's okay to be a guy. I think that's where it kind of starts.
Yeah. I mean, very specifically, there's things that you talk about that have to do with supporting a competitive drive and promoting sex and intimacy and passion and and rough housing and like the kinds of things that are described as more male behavior. Because yeah, like suddenly everyone was okay saying toxic masculinity, and now there's so many of us that are saying, wait a second, that's nonsense. Just like John and I always say, well, masculinity isn't toxic. It's just that toxic men have toxic masculinity. And the same is true for women. Like femininity isn't toxic. Toxic women have toxic femininity, kind of a thing, right? So we don't even need to distinguish between that anymore. What is behavior when you're looking at toddler boys versus toddler girls? I know this is controversial, but I'm telling you, they come out of the womb that way. They do. So play well into your adult years the way men like to play. And I think that's very pro testosterone.
Yeah, I mean, you had mentioned before about winning, and just being competitive. It's okay to be competitive. We should be promoting that with children, and we should be promoting that even as adults. And when we have competition, that actually drives testosterone. Christina was mentioning they've done studies with this. If, like, we just got done with the Super Bowl. I'm from Philadelphia, so I was kind of happy that the Eagles won. I didn't really care that much, but it was interesting to kind of watch. But if, let's say, I'm rooting and I really care, and my team wins, my testosterone just went up. And my friend sitting next to me, who, he was going for the other team, his testosterone is going to go down because his team lost. And we were just sitting there watching because we were emotionally involved. So competition drives that. It can make it go the other way too, but it gives us an opportunity to actually make our hormones work better and let them unfurl to the way they actually can. That's a good thing.
I appreciate you guys saying that, because however this got politicized, it's not a political
Right.
issue, right? We're
Correct.
three doctors talking about human health, right?
Mhm.
And humans are what they are, and there's certain realities of being a person, right? And I don't think we should be afraid to say this stuff, because if we don't, people are going to get more and more sick, and we're seeing that. And we
And
need to,
no,
please.
no, that it's our duty. I mean, it's our
It
duty.
was our oath.
It was our oath.
Yeah.
Patients are coming to us for that expertise, for that counsel on so many different things. I comment to John a lot. We have 3 little girls. Well, not as little. The youngest is 4, but I still think of them as babies. But I think about as a physician, when I'm the one who's pregnant, or I'm the one who has a newborn, or I'm the one with a sick baby, I forget everything. But I know that I can go to my peers or to my family, my parents, my sister that are also in medicine, and ask questions. Well, that's true of all the people in our personal life as physicians, even if it's not our expertise. They come to us because they're looking for a voice of someone they trust to help them discern what they should be concerned about, what they should be proactive about. It's our duty to do that.
Yeah, it's a sacred relationship. Yes.
Mhm.
It's sacred, and that's why sometimes when people say, oh well, that's controversial, I'm like, it's not. It's not controversial. It's reality. And if reality is controversial, then we have a bigger problem on our hands if we're living in a fantasy world. And I, again, say this all the time. I don't live in a fantasy world. I live in the front of the patients in front of me, sitting there, struggling to have a baby, struggling to lose weight, struggling to find intimacy with their partner. And if the answer is, I can't tell them to go act like a man, what? That's not, it's not fair to my patients. It's not fair to myself as a doctor who can guide these people.
And it's not fair to women. It's not fair to women because we're thinking this is just like maybe it's not all siloed where it's just the guys need to do it for guys and for us and there are guys. It's actually what's going to help women so they can actually be their best. There's a dynamic that goes on with all of this, and it goes both ways.
Yeah. I mean, as John mentions that on Instagram were referred to as the sex talks, that came well before our podcast. And that's because as people who have specialized in hormones, and as you mentioned, it's not just sex hormones, it's thyroid hormone, cortisol, growth hormone, etc. But as people who specialize in hormones, so much of what we do is that social implication. It's relationship management. It's guiding people through the concepts of so many women that I deal with that they're unlucky in love. Well, are they unlucky in love, or is it just that women have to be reminded that you can be a strong woman and have a man who's even stronger, and that's okay. So much of working with hormones really is helping people have love-filled lives.
And as we kind of dilute the concept of what is a man and what is a woman, you dilute the body's ability to respond appropriately. And that's where we see so many problems. So, whatever, controversial or not, we're going to talk about it because it's super important. And I don't know, get mad at us, whatever, whatever.
But you're still listening, so clearly you're curious.
Oh, they're listening. They're listening.
There's so many people in the world. Some people want to hear it, some people don't.
Yeah.
That's okay. One point I kind of want to re-emphasize here, for those that don't think about it this way, hormones are constantly changing. Like levels are constantly changing. So it's not like if I check your blood work on Monday, it's going to look, your T levels on Monday is going to look the same as Thursday, and it's going to constantly change. And honestly, if you check your blood work at 7 a.m., it's going to look different than 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. because there's a cycle of testosterone. Just like women have a 30-day cycle, we have a 24-hour cycle. So I'm just re-emphasizing that to people, that hormones change dramatically to all of the different inputs. And that's why sitting there and being competitive or lifting weights or fasting or whatever, it changes the levels continually. And it's a continual work in progress. And if the sum of all behaviors leads to a higher level, that's what we're after. But it's not one spot level, which I think a lot of listeners need to remember, because they come in, they're having a rough month, they get a level, they're 250 and they're super sad. And then it sort of makes them more sad. And I'm always like, hey, your body will respond. It will change. You just need to realize that it's a constant work. It's not one thing like we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's really true about labs. I'll often teach the young doctors that come to us, and just how I look at it in general. What was happening with the human at the time they drew the blood? That, asking those questions, because that actually can change many things, hormones and other things in a standard lab result. It's just this snapshot, like you said, and it doesn't always tell us everything. It gives us ideas about the concept of truth, but it isn't truth with a capital T. We have to kind of figure that out collectively, with having that relationship with the patient.
Yeah, I will often reference how medicine really is a science and an art. And I think talking about labs versus symptoms is a great example. Like, we want those labs. We want good, thorough labs. We don't just want one data point in one period of time. That's not going to be the thing that makes or breaks your case. You want the labs, they guide the diagnosis, and then you want those symptoms. You want that subjective survey. You want the patient's feedback, because very often, I'm not sure that's what I'm trying to say, but not often enough do we actually have a point of reference from when the person was feeling well. So how do we actually know how much have they changed in the past 3, 5, 10 years in response to life?
Yeah, and in wellness medicine, we're constantly doing labs. We're always thinking about it. We're willing to do labs with a greater frequency, let's say in a conventional approach. So you get that data, and then you can really get a really good picture with someone. That's where the real trust and relationship comes into play.
You gotta talk a little.
Yeah, I always say, like, objective evidence is important. Evidence-based research is important, but I treat the person sitting in front of me. I'm not treating someone based off of a guideline or one blood work or even 10 blood works. I'm treating the person in front of me. And we see that so much in like thyroid health, right? And I know you guys get into that. I want to focus on the sex stuff, but just like a sidebar, sometimes we replace that thyroid hormone because the symptoms are there. The number might not be out of range exactly. We know what optimal numbers are. And maybe we could do another podcast on thyroid, because it is fascinating, but we'll save that for another time because it's a whole conversation. But yeah, it's treating the person in front of you. And I know that's where I really have a passion for naturopathic medicine, is because that's what all of my colleagues, my mentors in your space, and I've had many that have taught me. And I've had many naturopathic doctors teach me. And I think that's what kind of, if anything, makes me special. It's my mentors are not MDs and DOs. They're PhDs, they're exercise physiologists, they're evolutionary biologists, archaeologists. It's like the whole breadth of science gives us a perspective, not just, the research from the last 100 years. 90% of it at this point is 99% of it is paid for by drug companies anyway, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Anything since 2000, I call to question, because that's when they changed the rules, and now it's very expensive to do a research study.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to get into TRT a little bit. So testosterone replacement therapy. It's like so overwhelmingly popular right now, and I have so many guys coming in, and I was really discouraged as a young doctor to go into that because of the dangers of it. I know you guys do TRT. Can you talk a little bit about maybe it in general, your approach to what kind of a guy is a candidate? What kind of guys should be worried about it and consider it? I know it's a really broad question, but kind of maybe a jumping off point.
I would have, you just said about the sort of dangers of it. And I think a lot of that is born out of now, as I say, it's like 7-Eleven, there's one on every corner. Everybody's doing it. A lot of these facilities are not owned or led enough by doctors. So they're coming at it from a business standpoint. Look, we're business people. I get it. But I always say it's medicine first and it's business second. Business might be a close second, but it's second to medicine and the patient in front of you. So if those kinds of clinics that are now all over the place is becoming more popular, it's diluting the real message of optimization and being careful and medicine. So I think that's created some of those things. If that's in fact what you meant, then there's just, yes, there are inherent dangers. Yes, there is almost in anything in medicine, potentially. So, we screen out for all of those kinds of things, whether that's thickening of the blood or of course, we're screening the prostate up and down and making sure that we're being careful about who is the best candidate. So to answer to that portion of your question, yes, you have to screen it very correctly. The person who's likely the candidate is someone that's starting to say something's different. We were just talking about this just a little bit ago, that patients, both men and women, will say something's missing. I don't know what it is.
Right.
It's like this abstract kind of thing that comes up. And then when they get well, they'll say the same, something's better. I don't exactly know how to say it to you, but it's just better. And so, yeah, I know what you've heard that, but I'm sure many times.
It's
So
almost like that's pathognomonic for testosterone. It's almost like that's one of those very unique presentations to a low, especially if they're just low normal testosterone patient, where they don't feel amazing. They don't feel their best, or the symptoms they're feeling are disproportionate to the stressors in their life. And then when you see them feeling better, like John's saying, it's like, I don't know what it is. I just feel better. So yeah, and the range of people who are candidates for testosterone, I would say, are much broader than those that I mean, I think if you're meeting the patient with awareness, then it's not so much about danger. You're aware of what are the things that we need to look for. What is their hematocrit, their hemoglobin, what are, those kinds of things. Because it's a pretty broad range of candidates.
it is. And again, so maybe the basics, the fatigue, low libido. I mean, we say, the reason we've coined the term the sex docs is not because we just necessarily thought about it, but it's because what happens, patients come to us because they want two key things. They want more sex and they want more energy. We've just seen that. So it's like this metabolism zest for life is what they're looking for. So a lot of times when people have those issues, that might be the candidate. Something's off here from my sexual wellness standpoint. It could be actual erectile dysfunction. It could be mild forms, and there's many different sort of iterations of that for guys. Something's just off when it comes to their libido, means psychological desire and drive to want to have sex. All of that starts to shift and change, and that might be time to knock on the door and look for someone that's going to, be accurate in how they're going to assess.
And a lot of times that libido, one just thinks of sexual libido, but we often comment that if your sexual libido is low, usually your libido for life is low. It's like your fervor to do things is what you are diminished. Especially, there's two scenarios where I think that's an important note for listeners is number one, the person who's in a happy, committed relationship where they're like, I love my partner. I'm very sexually attracted to them.
But
when we have sex, it's good, but both of us are tired. We have kids, we work, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I would challenge that because you should still have frequency of sex. It's almost a symptom. The other category is the person who says, well, I'm not in a relationship and I just don't have that life where I'm out dating casually. So sex isn't really or lack of sex is not really a symptom for me. Same thing, I would be challenging that. I would be saying sex is always a driving force because it's very parallel with your drive for other aspects of life.
And it's interesting because, we live in a very sick sexualized culture, but then sex is like no longer this thing that people can be proud of. It's kind of like has this weird dichotomy of, every singer these days looks like a stripper.
Right.
Sorry, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
But then like people are having less sex
Right. And
and
there's,
they're
yeah, sort of hyper puritanical approach to it. It's like those two, that's the dichotomy. It's funny you say that. We recorded a podcast and we talked about this, and that was actually, that dichotomy you're bringing up was discussed. That, why is it that it's always these two extremes, and then that actually there's a third choice, and the third choice is having a connection with a higher being and knowing that sex is actually far beyond even yourself, and looking at it that way. So you're sort of separating yourself away from this dichotomy thing, and it's probably because something, that sort of higher power concept is missing, and how important that is for people in their sexuality.
Yeah, that's a huge point for us. This idea of how we have this hypersexual society, like you said, but a society utterly afraid of intimacy. It makes no sense. It's not, you're not really gaining the benefit then of the sex, because yeah, the pleasures of the flesh, or whatever the expression would be, the pleasures of the flesh are good. They can be great, but the thing that makes them like great
Yeah,
is when
transcendent.
is when there's that almost spiritual connection with your mate. And people are missing out on that.
spirituality is lost in our society. It's been replaced with like God knows what ideology, and so yeah, my I did a whole season talking about spirituality, and then every conversation is now coming back to spirituality, and I think spirituality is how we find our health, right? And whether that's religion or psychedelic medicine or bonding with other people in like a conference or a concert or a retreat or whatever, like seeking that higher power, that thing that our scientific tools cannot measure, but is evidently all around us at all times, that is lost. And if we can reconnect with that, we would be a much healthier race
Yeah.
of people. Another thing I have to mention, since this came up and I haven't, there's this amazing book called Sex at Dawn. You
Oh,
guys know about it?
no.
No.
It's in from the early 2000s. Oh God, I'm brain farting his name, but he's incredible. He wrote a bunch of great books, and basically he's looking at sexuality through an evolutionary standpoint. And look, long story short, sex has been used by Homo sapiens and our evolutionary ancestors before Homo sapiens as a form of communication.
Hmm.
Sex is communication. It's how we transmit energy, information to each other. It's not just for procreation. Otherwise, it wouldn't feel and connect us the way it does. And I try to remind people of that. Like, it's not just for pleasure either. It's communicating, like there's a lot of evidence that in our hunter gatherer years, which was way more time than we've lived in these societies and these sort of, so in hunter gatherer societies, sex was used to create a hierarchy within the group. And these groups were controlled on some level by women who would use the sex to sort of indicate who is on different levels, and also control like drama or like infighting, right? The sex allowed them to communicate in a way that words can't, because it's a higher level communication, it's a spiritual communication. That book, when it came out, was used by a lot of people to suggest that he's promoting polygamy. However, we were unlikely to ever be creatures that only had one sex partner. That is very much a modern evolutionary thing, and we likely had many sex partners, or at least a few, and that is how we evolved. And there's some great chapters about penis shape and why is it shaped like that,
Yeah.
and all sorts of really like biological and physiological factors that really indicates that sex is far more interesting, important, and involved than just procreation. And so anyone
That's,
listening, if you
I
want
want
a
to check
fun
that
book,
out. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
really, really, really cool. So kind of just wrapping up the TRT. So I have opened up to doing TRT for men. My kind of barometer is
Yeah.
if your T levels are really good, like, 600, 700 or above, and you're having problems and you're showing up with a BMI of 32 and you're not exercising, I'm not offering you TRT. You could go down to any clinic down the street and they will give you sight unseen, labs unseen, all of the drugs and anastrozole, the HCG, all this stuff. They'll just give it to you and good luck if you feel good. I don't do that. I make sure that my patients are metabolically healthy, cardiology, there's no, ejection fraction problems, dilated cardiomyopathies, poorly treated hypertension, poorly treated sleep apnea. Like, I kind of do that. And only then will I really allow a guy to do TRT, because I just think like it shouldn't be a bandage. It should be a tool. And if you're not addressing these other problems, that being said, there's certain guys that try and try and try. And then I end up being like, hey, we're going to replace it because at least that'll get you in the gym and get you motivated. So it's sort of both things.
Yeah.
And
Our
then
approach is very similar.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
and then like the last thing is I don't allow them, I don't keep refilling it without blood work, because I'm screening for hematocrit and lipid derangements and estradiol levels, making sure they're not aromatizing everything into estradiol and creating all sorts of other problems, because you're can feminize yourself with testosterone, which most men don't realize, especially men with a lot of obesity, where the fat cells are aromatizing the testosterone. So I'm kind of guiding them. And then last thing is I only replace to physiological or slightly higher than physiological doses. Like, I don't really have any guys running 1500 plus on their total. I'm kind of keeping it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true.
You guys feel me on that. So that's really important, because you can go to any clinic, pay them a bunch of money, and they'll do whatever you want. And I think that's where a lot of the bad experiences and the bad stories come from. And obviously also bodybuilder guys, abusing testosterone and anabolics that gave everything a bad name. And it's wild. And I even take some of those cases on and I help them.
I do too. I love those guys because I feel like I'm helping them and I'm showing them, because a lot of times they haven't, a lot of times they'll come to see me because they're looking for labs, because they know they haven't done it. They know they're probably out there doing something kind of monkey business. And then you get them in and I can kind of reel them into the reality. We can bring the levels down. Yeah, I might initially give them a little more than I usually do, because I'm trying to keep their attention. And then eventually over time, we get them into physiologic levels. And yeah, I feel like I'm saving them.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about peptides? So a lot of interest in the GnRH secretagogues, like there's sermorelin, ipamorelin, even some like technically illegal drugs. My guys come to me asking about MK677. I don't know if that's crossed your path, but there's a lot of these different drugs that sort of manipulate the growth hormone axis, which goes in line with this. So is that something you guys do? What are your thoughts on peptide therapy?
Yeah, we were sort of early adopters of that. That goes back to about 2015, 2016, when we really started getting into peptides initially, when it just first started hitting the clinical world, I would say. And yeah, I mean, all of those secretagogues for growth hormone are fantastic. Wouldn't say all of them, but the concept of a secretagogue and clinically being beneficial, it's great to work with them. MK677 or ibutamoren, you could get ibutamoren up until only recently. There's a newer one called macarelin or macarelin. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's MAC. That we're just now looking into. I don't have a lot of clinical experience with it yet, but there's starting to be alternatives to, let's say, CJC and ipamorelin. That, because again, the government and all their wisdom not allowing us to have access to some of these things, but there are now reasonable alternatives to it. So yes, when it comes to growth hormone, immune stimulation with things like thymosin alpha 1 and thymosin beta 4, fantastic. BPC, I don't know how much more we need to understand. That works. Like, it's ridiculous. It works. And not only from a gut standpoint, because you can take it orally, but we would have patients use a very small insulin needle that wasn't dangerous for them, and they could spot inject locally to an area of issue or concern and get further benefit because they were injecting locally. It's harder to get the BPC from an injectable standpoint at the moment. But yes, these peptides are fantastic. We should continue to consider using them. I mean, things like tesamorelin, which is FDA approved as a Grifta. I mean, that stuff just chews up central adiposity in a fantastic way. So yes, I think peptides are great. I think it is the future. I think because hormones are affecting things at the DNA level, and now we're seeing that this is working more at the receptor level on the cell membrane. So I think it's more clinically forgiving for that reason. It's just not, it's changing things, but not as, let's say, as abruptly as testosterone and some of these
It's
other.
like a broad spectrum approach.
Yeah, and so it's just clinically forgiving. I don't know. I've never once seen a side effect from something, let's say BPC. Not once, like ever.
Yeah.
And we've done
And
it
we've got
for
good,
years.
good
Right.
amount of data.
Yeah.
I mean, I think any doctor who's functionally minded should have the blanket answer of, yes, I'm open to peptides. And then from there, because it's, I mean, it's a book, you know, of like all the different things out there. So from there, depending on what your expertise is, the type of patient you're mostly seeing, then really do your due diligence, learning those handful or so really, really well so that you can discern when to use them, when not to use them. But for the most part, I think it's a relatively, if it's not working well, it's relatively benign. And if it does work, then it has the potential to be so impactful. I mean, BPC for me personally, for my stomach, has been just like a dream. I'm excited to go to Europe, or I'm stressed about a big project, my stomach gets angry. So for me, BPC is like, you know, guardian angel. Yeah.
Thank you for saying all that. I think that I used to say that, or I still say that intermittent fasting was the most powerful medical intervention that I ever learned because it's just so simple and so effective. And I would have to say that peptide therapy is the most underappreciated and misunderstood therapy that has the potential to dramatically improve patients' lives.
Yeah.
And with a very low risk and a high reward. And I think people are waking up to it. And I pray that the system will let it go and actually support us in our effort to bring these things sort of not just to market, but to the public eye, and stop with the fear mongering and stop with the, corporatization of it. Because what ends up happening, like hormone therapy, is people get this stuff, from unevaluated or untrustworthy sources, and we end up with actual problems that have nothing to do with the hormone or the peptide, but rather the inappropriate supervision, poor product quality, and just sort of like it living in the black market space, similar in ways to psychedelic medicine, which I think has a parallel here, where there's a lot of really amazing benefits that, if just done with some thought and less fear and more understanding and more supervision, frankly, we can really help a lot of people.
I mean, I would liken it to something even simpler, like raw dairy. You know, I think that to a certain extent, it makes you wonder if it isn't this self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, no, let's keep it so fringe that we get more and more mismanaged cases so that we have supportive data to feed the fear mongering. I don't know if it's just my age or my wisdom, but I'm starting to get more and more like, why can't we drink raw milk? We drink raw milk, but people are afraid, like deathly afraid of that, of raw cheeses. And then when they travel and they're in Italy, they don't ask if the cheese is raw or not.
And it
They
often is.
they stop thinking about it. So I think peptides are definitely, we've got to protect them as practitioners, and the patients have to speak up as well to protect those tools that just really serve us.
Thank you for saying that. It's so important. Before we run out of time, let's switch gears to women, because I'll say it again. I used to think, I'll say I was trained to think that female hormone replacement is profoundly dangerous. It gives women high risk of breast cancer. You shouldn't do it. And it's sort of a weird, kooky doctor thing. Then, there was various doctors in my world, including my OB, that well, my wife, Sobi, I should
Right.
say. But also the gentleman who I refer to most
Mm.
often and sort of it mentors me. He's a bit older and really has guided me. And other like Dr. Mary Claire wrote an awesome book about it. I know you know, and if you guys haven't checked her out, please check her out. She's awesome. But there is a movement to basically say that, you know, replacing women's hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and now testosterone, which is newer, is actually very good for many, many, many reasons. Can you speak to that, guys? Because I've never had anyone talk about it with me on this podcast.
Well, I mean, we'll talk about the study, but I'd like to add to the intro of this discussion to say how often one will ask a traditionally trained endocrinologist about their female sex hormones, and the endocrinologist will say, that's not my specialty, go back to your gynae. But then the gynecologist will say, well, that's not what I do. I don't do hormones. Go to the hormone doctor. So I've always found it particularly frustrating that you have these two specialties that are supposed to be the pinnacles of hormone balancing,
particularly for women.
but for women that don't have the answer, but adamantly oppose. I'm like, well, here I am standing here going, hi, I know the answer. But my patients will say, well, my gynecologist says that's bad. Okay, well, what does your gynecologist recommend? They don't have an answer. It's changing. It's definitely changing. But anyway, I'm sure you're going to talk about the studies, right?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the book Blind Spots. I don't know if you're familiar with Blind Spots. This Dr. McKay or Mackey, I forget how to pronounce his name, but it's called Blind Spots. I would encourage you to check it out. Have your readers, your listeners check it out. It's about medical dogma. That's what the book is about. So he has several chapters about various concepts within medicine that some kind of dogmatic concept, something as simple as Dr. Semmelweis, who said, why don't we wash our hands to make sure women don't get puerperal fever when, during childbirth. And he started doing that. And then everyone, they said, the doctor said, well, I'm a gentleman and gentlemen don't carry these kind of diseases. That's impossible. And then essentially he went crazy and died, literally in an insane asylum because they drove him crazy because they said he was crazy for saying what he said, as one example. But what he specifically talked about in Blind Spots was the Women's Health Initiative and essentially the dogma that was created out of a lie, because he goes through in a really interesting detective kind of way of interviewing the key primary primary investigators, the two key ones, one man and a woman, I forget their names. And he interviews them and goes through the process of and interviewing other principal investigators that were part of the WHI. And essentially in 2002, when they launched this study, they went to Chicago for their annual conference, and they said we're scrapping all the principal investigators. They said we're scrapping this agenda. This is the one thing we're going to be talking about. Here's the paper, and the paper says estrogen causes breast cancer, and here's the data. And they hand it to them, and then the principal investigators are sitting there, in the audience, and they said, wait a second, that's not what it says. The data is wrong in the way you're presenting it. It's not actually a statistically significant increase. We want to be able to do some edits. They said, okay, you have 2 hours to do the edits. They sat there, they scrambled, they did the edits, they handed it to the woman, and she said, sorry, the courier already came. So the courier came, they published it, and then it went. I mean, it's like a movie. So they published it, and then all the people who were dissenting were not allowed to dissent. No, they would have lost their job. They wouldn't be able to, they're ostracized within the scientific community, and they had to shut up. They tried to say some things about it, but that voice was pushed away, and they went forward with this. The two main principal investigators, their whole entire career was based on saving hundreds of thousands of women from breast cancer, all in the end based off a lie. So now fast forward, those same people are like, well, yeah, I guess maybe we were off a little bit, but they're starting to admit it. And there's other people like you were just mentioning that are out there that are championing all of this and saying, no, it's all nonsense. And it was a whole generation of women who were not allowed to use this, and were fear mongered. And then doctors, often, as you know, we all, I don't, when you, about certain things, you go, well, how did you learn that? I don't know. It's just what I was taught,
Mhm.
you know? And so we say these lies over and over again. We don't even realize they're lies. And that's certainly the case when it comes to estrogen for women. So it's now doing this for so many years to finally see a real good push against all of that has been fantastic. So I think it's very liberating. It's very liberating for women. So yes, that.
It's difficult. It's difficult for the medical community. I mean, I think docs get a real, we kind of get poo-pooed almost from any direction. If we're the ones saying, wait a second, you know, we get referred to as cuckoo doctors or quacks, is
Quacks,
that the
yeah.
expression? But if you try to follow the community, because there's a lot of peer pressure to follow the community, then that's also no good. I mean, I think sometimes it's hard for patients to appreciate how much doctors really go into this field with incredible intention to vocate our lives to serving others. But we have been trained in modern medicine to rely on the research. And the reality is that, as you pointed out, and I mean, I know I worked at the um, Prevention Research Center up at Yale. You can prove anything you want to prove. So now we're demystifying estrogen, thanks to brave people like your OB, right? We're demystifying estrogen. Patients are asking for it, and we're learning what's true, which is it's beneficial. It's necessary to a certain extent, especially for quality of life.
Especially in a modern world where women are trying to live basically a more youthful lifestyle for longer, right? They don't want to turn into an old lady, you know? And that literally women come to me. I'm like, I'm going through menopause. I don't want to turn into an old lady. I just had one. I just got married. She
Yeah.
got
Yes.
remarried, you
Yeah.
know, and he's on T and
Mhm.
he's feeling great. And they're going to the gym every day and they're about to world travel. And she's like, I don't want to have vaginal dryness. I want to have a young, youthful life. And so what, you know, we have to adapt. And man, thank you for sharing that story because this is my problem with evidence-based medicine is it cannot just be the only thing and call it the gold standard if you want, but it's first of all, since 2000, fully purchased by drug companies, like
Yeah.
for the most part. And so much of it, if it's not convenient, can be purchased to be deleted, right? So the study exists, but they just buy it out and delete it or put it behind a really expensive paywall. So, like
Yeah.
so much of the LDL, you know, this big debate is LDL important. They just put it behind paywalls, and you can search it. You see a headline, and then good luck getting into that article. You know, and no one's going to pay a bunch of money to get into this article that says, "Hey, we're the group of cardiologists that say LDL doesn't matter." And I tell people all about this, and like they can't get to the study because it's just so. And then studies can be manipulated, and studies can also just be buried. Or I can show everyone in the hospital the intermittent fasting study and they called me crazy until they went to me and found out they have prediabetes and then went on an intermittent fasting low carb diet and everything got better. But did they go around the hospital telling everyone, oh, Dr. Gary and the intermittent fasting people are right? No, they quietly did it and continued to recommend a heart healthy diet to their patients with low fat and low carbs and low protein and all the garbage and 4 or 5 meals a day. And I'm like, how can you live with yourself? Like, I don't get it. Sorry, a little bit triggered by that because I went through it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
As a traditional doctor, I went through it. I got vilified and blah, blah, blah. And half of those people are my patients now. I don't know who they tell that they're my patients, but they are because they know that I'm reading the literature and I'm listening to smart people. And I'm not just anchored in what I got trained 20 years ago. Like, who cares? You know,
Right.
we're scientists. We're supposed to be able to change our mind. And that's what I reserve the right to do at all
That's
times.
right. Yeah. I mean, we
Yep.
should never stop asking questions, and we should constantly be challenging our own approaches
Yeah. The science is never settled, and don't be a victim of your own
of your
hypothesis.
hypothesis,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And science is, you know, there's certain facts and most of them are theories.
Yes.
There's certain facts, but there's mostly theories that can be changed, modified, proven, disproven, all these, you know, it's a journey. So female hormone replacement is safe. I
Yes.
Yes.
I think it's a smart thing for women to really consider early on, learn about, and start the intervention sooner because there is some concern if you're like really far postmenopause
Yeah,
to start it? What are your thoughts on that? Like women that are 20 years post-menopause and they're coming to you?
I think now especially, again, so we would be basing perhaps some of that, again, everything's going to now get disrupted because the WHI and all of that is now turned upside down on its head.
right. What's the
So,
anchor?
right, exactly. It was the anchor for everything. It all extended out of that. So I would challenge every bit of it. I have patients, we were just saying this earlier, we have patients in their teens, we have patients in their 90s and everywhere in between. I literally have a 95-year-old patient. Now, I don't give her estrogen. It just happens to be when I think about her, but she gets testosterone and she loves it. But I've had many women in their 80s where we just give a little bit of estrogen, and a little bit for that type of woman will go a long way. So it's all, again, it's about monitoring, meeting the patient where they're at, and those types of things. And no, I do not think it's going to be increasing the risk for something and starting later. And these are all just part of that dogma of resisting estrogen replacement therapy for women born out of the fear of breast cancer. It's just
Yeah,
that.
and I also think that we will continue to see that a lot of that information is probably just skewed because it's been a very reductionistic model. So there's so many elements to that. You had mentions about women in modern times who just don't want to become old ladies. Well, there is quite a bit of literature out there that also compares industrialized women in industrialized countries to those in underdeveloped countries and what the menopause process looks like for them. Our hormones are supposed to go down. They're not supposed to go away. So even an 80-year-old female, if we're giving her testosterone, we are in theory giving her estrogen therapy, right? Because we are expecting some of that testosterone to turn into the estrogen. So I think the point is always keep a very individualized approach to each patient. You have your guidelines, your therapeutic guidelines, but always learn the details of that individual and you'll end up making the best clinical decisions.
Last question about female hormone replacement. A lot of women are now opening their eyes to the testosterone part. And that does seem to be a little bit of because the estrogen part, and now they're like, wait, I can replace my testosterone. Do I even have testosterone? Yes, you have testosterone. Does it spike during ovulation? Yes, it spikes during ovulation, but you still have some baseline testosterone. And so I'm seeing clinically as I've opened up to it, that might be the most powerful one. That's the one that gives a lot of quality of life. And I'm interested in quality of life. I know there's people right now talking about never dying, and that's fine. I'm not personally so interested in that because I think it's a long road and I think it's a whole separate conversation, but I'm interested in quality of life.
Right.
And I find that a very modest dose of tea can change a woman's life. Why is that so like still weird to people? And what is your experience with it? Because mine is, and this is just in the last year where I'm seeing dramatic outcomes with 50-year-old women, 60-year-old women, 70-year-old women,
40-year-old women.
40-year-old women. I got one.
Yeah.
A lot of them have, and for the record, a lot of them have come to me having learned about it, knowing that I'm an open-minded guy, and I will read about it and I will support them through it. I'd rather them do it with me where I can keep an eye on it than go off and do it with one of these clinics that don't supervise. So can you guys speak to the testosterone piece a little bit?
Testosterone.
My mentor was Dr. Gino Tutera. He was one of the founders and sort of pushed forward the concept of hormone pellets, subcutaneous hormone pellets. And so that's what we've both been doing for the past 18 years. And so Dr. Tutera really did a lot of work early on, even before he started doing pellets, and just with testosterone. And it's something he'd always say to me, testosterone rules the vulva. So when we're talking about just the health of the vulva, we tend to just default and think, well, estrogen. And it's true. When we're talking about dryness, a lot of times it's estrogen that's going to really help with that. But if you get a younger woman who's sort of perimenopausal and she doesn't really have estrogen deficiency, it is the testosterone that will largely help with sensitivity, secretion, the overall responsiveness, sexual responsiveness will be improved by testosterone, whether that is adding it locally or systemically in the body. So yes, we're huge fans of it. I always say if somebody forced me and said, you have to choose between estrogen or testosterone for all of your female patients so they don't come back to you and pull your hair out, what are you going to do? I'm going testosterone. That's what I would choose if I had
How
to.
interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited for you, and I'm excited for your patients. Really, you know, I would encourage you to, as you continue to learn more about it, to think about, especially the younger patients. One of the things I've commented before that I see are that my females, I mean, I do tend to work with women that are a little bit younger than what you work with, than what, you know, John works with. Maybe, let's say 25 to 55 is probably going to be more of my typical range. And I will very easily see women over medicated on estrogen and then severely under medicated on testosterone. And a little testosterone can go a long way, especially when you think about the synergy of the hormones, how they work together. You got to think about how prevalent hypothyroid or subclinical hypothyroidism is, how stressed the cortisol system is. Like, when you start looking at that, like almost Rubik's cube of the hormones, that little bit of testosterone, quality of life, I mean, everything you put on muscle mass, your brain functions better, your bones are stronger, you're preventing dementia, you have more libido. Like, to me, it's pretty foolproof.
Mhm.
You know what really changed my mind about it was Dr. Mindy Pels. She's like the fasting doctor,
Oh,
and she's the fasting doctor, and she really promotes intermittent fasting. And obviously, that's a big part of what I do. So, just really diving into her hormone work and understanding that ovulation time, the testosterone really spikes, and this is a special time for women where their cognition, their creativity, their ability to sort of perform and feel great is maximized. And I was like, oh, it clicked in this role of test in women, and maybe that doesn't connect with others, but to me, I'm like looking at this whole big picture of all these different women going through all these different things, and I was like, so that's how critical it is, that during this most important time where the woman is preparing to create a baby, and that's when this hormone spikes and it does this amazing thing. Well, of course, then if you're disrupting that whole process or you're not replacing it, you're missing maybe like you guys said, maybe the most critical piece of the puzzle for
Yeah.
women.
Women have more testosterone and androgens in their system than they do estrogen. So I know the numbers don't look that way, but it's like picogram per deciliter versus nanograms per deciliter. So and then when you add up all the other androgens, DHEA, androstenedione, all the other ones, if you added them all up, it is more than actually estrogens in the system. So and back to originally to your question, like, why do people think that? It's just, socially, this is what people think. You say
It's marketing.
women have estrogen and men have testosterone, and neither
that's
the two
it.
shall cross, and it's just wrong.
Yeah. And the whole idea of testosterone is only necessary until the point that you have had children. Then you don't need that. Like, why is that? I don't know, my heart, like my bones, my brain, like
My bones, yeah, the brain.
yeah,
Brutality,
it's
life.
too hard to not
Right.
be a little sarcastic about it, but when we're speaking with sincerity, I would say really like enjoy that process of discovering that for your patients, because it's so rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you guys. I learned so much. It's so fun to talk to like-minded physicians that are really so understanding of something that I'm just learning about, and that's my jam. I'm trying to learn. I'm always trying to change, and everyone who's listening, I encourage you to just open your mind. We've referenced multiple books, multiple really brilliant people. This should be a jumping off point. Don't just buy what we're saying. Go and do your own research and learn about it. With that being said, you guys are amazing. How could people find you? How can people learn about you? Can you kind of share that stuff again with everyone?
So yeah, people can follow us on the Longevity Protocol Pod. So that's through Spotify and the usual channels that way. You can also follow us on Instagram at the Sex Docs, a little bit more of our personal lives, a little bit to some degree. But again, that's at the Sex Docs. And then also our private practice right here in Scottsdale, Arizona at hormone-zone.com. So it's called the Hormone Zone.
Amazing. Thank you guys again for your time. Thank you everyone for listening. And with that, adios.
Adios.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care.